Welcome to Long Story Short. Today's story, the Manhattan Project. A secret project so big, so expensive, and so world-changing that half the people building it didn't even know what they were building. Spoiler alert, it was the atomic bomb. It's the late 1930s, and the world is in full chaos mode. Nazi Germany is on the rise, Japan is invading its neighbors, and everyone's reading the news thinking, this is not going to end well. Meanwhile, in science land, some clever people in Europe, like German physicists Otto Hahn and Lise Meitner, figure out nuclear fission in 1938. Basically, they realize you can split an atom and release an insane amount of energy. Cue panic in the United States. What if the Nazis get this technology first? A bunch of scientists, including Albert Einstein and physicist Leo Szilard, send a letter to US President Franklin Roosevelt in 1939 saying, "Hey, you might want to build a bomb before Hitler does." Roosevelt listens, and so begins the journey toward the biggest science project in human history. So in 1942, the Manhattan Project was born. And not just any project. We're talking about the biggest, costliest, most top-secret operation the US had ever attempted. And how secret was it? Vice President Harry Truman didn't even know it existed until he became president. Imagine clocking into your new job and someone hands you a file like, "Surprise! We're building a weapon that can vaporize cities. Have a nice day." General Leslie Groves was the man chosen to run this wild endeavor. A big, blunt military guy who had just finished building the Pentagon, so he knew how to handle pressure, deadlines, and ridiculous amounts of paperwork. Groves wasn't there to debate ethics or ponder quantum physics. He was there to get the job done. Now, for the science part. But don't worry, we'll keep it friendly. The magic behind the bomb? Splitting atoms. Certain atoms, like uranium-235 and plutonium-239, are unstable. Hit them just right, and they split apart, releasing a ridiculous amount of energy and setting off a chain reaction, like dominoes made of pure destruction. One reaction sets off another, and boom. Instead of a firecracker, you get a mini sun. To make this happen, Groves turned to a rather unusual pick for his chief scientist, J. Robert Oppenheimer, a brilliant, eccentric physicist from Berkeley, often described as more of a dreamer than a builder. He quoted Sanskrit, read French poetry, and smoked like it was a competitive sport. He was famously described by his peers as too theoretical to make anything actually work. Spoiler, it worked. Because Oppenheimer had a superpower. He could bring together the greatest minds in physics and get them all pulling in the same direction. And so, under his leadership, Los Alamos, New Mexico became the top-secret laboratory where the bomb would be born. And when we say greatest minds, we mean it. Enrico Fermi, the architect of the first nuclear reactor. Niels Bohr, who basically invented quantum theory. Richard Feynman, the guy who'd later become the rock star of physics lectures, all quirky and brilliant and usually late. Many of these scientists had fled fascist regimes in Europe. For them, stopping Hitler wasn't just science, it was personal. But it wasn't all chalkboards and eureka moments. The Manhattan Project stretched across multiple secret sites. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where uranium was painstakingly enriched. Hanford, Washington, where plutonium was cooked up in massive reactors. And of course, Los Alamos, where theory met engineering and exploded. In total, over 130,000 people worked on the Manhattan Project. And here's the wild part. Most had no idea what they were building. Factory workers were told vague things like, "We're helping the war effort," and scientists were divided into teams so no one could see the full picture. Code names were everywhere. Secrecy was absolute. And if you asked too many questions, you were reassigned, usually not with a pat on the back. This project cost about $2 billion back then. That's over $25 billion today, all to build one weapon, before the Axis powers did. But behind all this high-stakes science were real human beings. People who laughed, argued, stressed, and slowly began to realize that they weren't just building a weapon to stop a war. They might be creating something that could change the entire future of humanity. Some, like Leo Szilard, one of the minds behind the idea of the chain reaction, started to get cold feet. He saw the writing on the wall. Even if the bomb stopped Hitler, what would happen after? Could anyone really be trusted with this kind of power? Meanwhile, Groves didn't want philosophy. He wanted results. Time was running out. The Nazis were retreating, but Japan was still fighting tooth and nail. Every delay felt like a gamble with the fate of the war and the world. So, they pressed on. The calculations got more precise. The uranium got purer. The plutonium cores were shaped with terrifying care, and soon they would have to test it. Fast forward to July 16, 1945, deep in the desert of New Mexico. It's just before dawn, and a group of the world's most brilliant and exhausted scientists are crouched in bunkers, holding their breath. They've spent years building a bomb they weren't even sure would work. They called the test site Trinity. Poetic, right? At exactly 5:29 a.m., Boom! The desert lit up with a blinding flash, brighter than the sun. The shockwave rippled for miles. The mushroom cloud billowed up over 7.5 miles into the sky. One observer described it as a cosmic event, both beautiful and horrifying. And in that moment, humanity officially entered the nuclear age. Standing in awe, and probably a bit of existential dread, Oppenheimer famously whispered a line from Hindu scripture: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Cheerful guy. But you can't really blame him. They'd just unlocked the power to wipe out entire cities in seconds. And now the question became, would they actually use it? Well, by that time, World War II in Europe was over. Hitler was dead. Germany had surrendered. But Japan, still fighting. The battles in the Pacific, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, had shown how costly an invasion of the Japanese mainland would be. The US military estimated it could take millions of lives, on both sides. So the US issued an ultimatum: surrender, or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan didn't respond. And so, on August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The explosion flattened the city. 70,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would die from burns and radiation poisoning in the following days and weeks. Still, Japan didn't surrender. So, 3 days later, August 9th, the US dropped a second bomb, Fat Man, on the city of Nagasaki. Another 40,000 people were killed instantly. The landscape turned to ash. Survivors, known as hibakusha, were left with scars, illnesses, and trauma that would last generations. Just 6 days later, on August 15th, Japan finally surrendered. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, was over. The bomb had done its job. But at what cost? The Manhattan Project didn't just end a war, it launched the world into the nuclear age. After the bombs, the US and Soviet Union rushed into an arms race, building bigger and deadlier bombs. Scientists who had worked on the Manhattan Project were suddenly asking, what have we done? Oppenheimer lost his security clearance. Szilard became a peace activist. Nuclear weapons became a permanent feature of global politics. And those secret cities, many became permanent towns. Hanford kept producing plutonium for decades. Los Alamos is still a nuclear research site. Today, the Manhattan Project is both a story of scientific brilliance and a cautionary tale about the power we now hold. We split the atom and split history in half. And that's the long story short. A secret project, a world-changing weapon, and a legacy we're still living with today. Science changed everything, and maybe, just maybe, we should keep asking, just because we can, should we? If you learned something new, feel free to like, subscribe, or just win your next trivia night. See you next time.